In this edition of In the Workshop, I'd like to show you how to cut a keyway without using a keyway brooch. And what is a keyway brooch? Well, it's quite a simple yet clever tool for cutting keyways in flywheels or in pulleys and things like that. And it's a very nasty looking thing with lots of teeth, a bit like my ex-wife, I suppose. To show what a keyway brooch looks like, here's a collection of them. And the idea is you drive it through the work. You have a centre piece that holds it in position, and you drive it through the work and it cuts a keyway. And then if you want the keyway any deeper, you put shims in behind the blade. For this you need some sort of a press. These presses are called Arbor Presses. I don't have an Arbor Press and I don't have any keyway brooches. So I'm going to show another way of doing it. At the moment on screen, I'm machining the centre boss of the flywheel for the 5A steam engine that I'm resurrecting. One of the bosses on the casting was originally very large, and this was to facilitate holding the flywheel in the chuck. And currently I'm removing about a third of this boss. I'm actually deviating from the drawing slightly, because I've recessed the boss at the other side so that the key doesn't stick out quite as far as it normally would do. But at the moment there's no sign of a keyway and there's no sign of a key. So how am I going to do it without a keyway brooch? The main problem with these keyway brooches, particularly in sets, is they are very expensive. And in my entire life, I think I've only ever cut 2 keyways before. So how am I going to do it without a keyway brooch? I'm going to use one of these. Initially I thought if I put 2 together it will cut the keyway to the exact size that I want, but in reality it was moving about, so I went back to a single one. These are parting tool blades, and they're designed to fit in a holder and form almost an everlasting parting tool. As you break a bit off, you can move a bit more of the parting tool out from the holder. Well, maybe not everlasting, but they do last a long time. To demonstrate this principle, I'm going to use a piece of steel. I'm not going to do it on the flywheel. I think really I will buy a brooch for that. And what's the reason behind this, after all I've just said? Well, it's all down to cost really. The flywheel casting was very expensive. Before I spent quite a few hours machining it, so I would really hate to mess it up. As I mentioned previously, I have cut keyways using this method before, and the first thing I have to do is stop the chuck from moving. This is a very crude way of doing it, but it's very simple, and simple is good. My lathe does not have any way of locking the headstock, so I use a couple of pieces of wood and gently tap them into position, and now the chuck can't move. Crude but effective. The only problem I can see in doing this is if I forget and turn the lathe on, it's not going to go anywhere and damage could occur, so I've isolated the power. Unplugged it from the mains in fact. I've fitted the parting tool on its side in the tool holder, and it's resting on top of a lathe tool, as you can see here. As a general rule, the centre of the parting tool blade in this orientation needs to be at centre height. And now you can see clearly what I'm doing. I'm moving the parting tool blade in and out of the work, and as you can see it is cutting a keyway. This is working very well, and you can see the keyway starting to appear. You do, however, need a lot of patience with this, because I can only advance the tool a very small amount, maybe 1 thou at a time. If I try and take too much of a cut, it's all going to go sadly wrong. And also, as I mentioned earlier, and in this clip you can clearly see that the parting tool blade, which is on its side, is sat on top of a lathe tool. And what you can't see is a very small piece of packing behind the parting tool blade at the front, and this is to set the relief angle, so that there's a little bit of clearance for the cutter to do its work. I could have ground the end of the parting tool to the right angle, but it seems such a waste as it's a new piece of parting tool. This clip shows the keyway that I've just cut using this method, and it's successful. If this was a smaller component, that would be fine. But now I'm lifting the position of the tool to cut a deeper keyway, and this may be a problem. As you can see, I'm now above the original keyway, and I start again, back and forth, very slowly, advancing about 1 thou at a time. Plenty of patience is needed for this, and you cannot rush it. If you try and take a deeper cut, you probably won't get through the work. And with a collar like this, what's going to happen is it's going to push it into the chuck, and then it will become out of line and you'll make a mess of it. A quick health and safety warning. I like to give health and safety warnings when I think they're appropriate, and this is appropriate. When doing this job, wear some safety glasses, because if anything goes wrong and the tool shatters, it's tool steel and it's very brittle and it shatters with a vengeance and parts can fly everywhere. So it's a good idea to have some eye protection. I suppose you can easily remove any fragments of tool steel that may be stuck in your head if the tool shatters, but if the parts are stuck in your eye, you will not be able to see what you're doing. I'm cutting this keyway in a piece of steel, and it's much harder to cut a keyway in a piece of steel than it is in a piece of cast iron, because cast iron is generally much more crumbly and it has its own graphite lubricant built in. And on this piece of steel, to make the cutting slightly easier, I've used some oil. This is quite a slow process, but somehow it's relaxing. Oh, sorry, I just dropped off there for a moment. So it's back and forth, in and out, for ages until the keyway's been cut. This is definitely looking a little bit like model engineer's porn, so please try not to get too excited whilst watching this. There, I've just made a quick adjustment to the tool to get the keyway even larger. This bush that I'm working on is very short, whereas the keyway through the flywheel is going to be much longer than this, and that's the reason I didn't want to use this method. This parting tool blade is very thin and quite small, and I don't think I'd get a neat keyway. And if I had a parting tool blade that was 3/16 of an inch thick, it would be far too big to go down the centre of the flywheel, because the hole diameter is only 5/8 of an inch. It's no good, I can't stand it any longer. I'm definitely going to have to speed up this clip. And as the in and out stuff comes to its inevitable conclusion, we finally have a keyway cut in the piece of steel. And as you can see, it's not perfect. There are other ways of doing this. You could file it with a needle file, but I think life's too short for that. The first keyway that I cut, just using the parting tool as it was actually okay. It would have been fine, a little bit on the small side, but once I started changing the position of the tool, then it started to wander a little bit. There are other methods of doing this that I could have used. I could have modified a small boring bar, just reground the end to the right shape. I could have made a one-off custom cutting tool to do this job, but that takes time. I think I'm just going to go and buy a Keyway Broach. Life's too short. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.